Hey, everybody. Just another week. This week, we're going to be going over a lot of the noise content. We're going to be going over a variety of different topics. Again, the purpose of this weekly review is to hopefully try to condense down some of the more important information, as similar to last week, there's a lot of content. However, a lot of the readings you're going to find further be able to flesh out some of the details and the content that we're going to talk about today. So make sure to do those readings. It's still required before any of the quizzes or assignments, and you're going to find it very helpful. But let's go ahead and dive into this week's content a little bit more into what is hazardous noise and how it pertains to environmental and personal health. All right, so again, this weekly review is about the content in week number 4, and that has to do with noise. So some of the topics that we're going to go over is just very generally, what is noise, some of the key factors and important information for that. Then we're going to as well be going over the ear anatomy of the ear. That way we better understand how does noise actually impact the human body? How do we interpret sounds? And going into that, same thing, what are the different types of hearing loss that we're going to be going over and learning that are important to know? In addition to that, we're going to be looking at occupational noise programs, specifically legal requirements that are allowed based upon noise exposure, as it can be hazardous to our health, and then assessing and measuring hazardous noise. So first, we're going to be going over what is sound. And so ultimately, sound is vibration, very similar to radiation. Radiation occurs in energy waves that are produced from a material. Sound, very similarly, is energy waves that are created. Particularly, there are two items that make up sound and vibration. That's intensity and frequency. With intensity, you can think energy. Whenever it comes to sound, that's measured in decibels. It's how much energy does this sound have, and that will then impact how hard or how it impacts the object that it influences or is directed to. Then there's frequency. Frequency, you can think of pitch, as well as how often do certain events repeat. So for example, within a certain second, one of the frequencies that the human ear can be able to detect is anywhere between 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz or 20,000 hertz. And so as a sound wave, as it moves across in a traditional wave-like fashion, the higher frequency or the higher the hertz of it, the faster it's going. And the faster that it completes one rotation is a way you can be able to think about it. So, but sound, again, it just has to do with the intensity or the energy behind it, and then the frequency or how fast that it's traveling. And that ultimately decides how it impacts both our hearing and other physiological processes within our body. Again, stating vibrations, they create a pressure in the form of a wave, very similar to radiation. It deals in waves, and it's otherwise known as a sound pressure level. And noise is related to sound because noise ultimately is any unwanted sounds. And so it really has to do with almost that nuisance factor. Anything that's considered noise are just sounds that we don't want to be exposed to. So now let's dive a little bit into the anatomy of the ear. Ultimately, the ear is split up into 3 different parts. There is the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And it's important to be able to understand that each of these 3 different parts has a different function and a different reason on why it's there. This picture to the right is just an illustration of these 3 different parts. The outer ear, and we'll go into each of these in a little bit more into the functionality and some other specific parts. But the outer ear typically encompasses the pinna, which is the outside of the ear that you can feel and that you can physically see. Then it is typically encompassed of different folds, and it just depends on the variety of person as well. It also, the outer ear encompasses the ear canal itself. Then leading into the middle ear, which encompasses the eardrum and as well as the inner ear bones, otherwise known as the ossicles. And then the inner ear is made up of the semicircular canals, all the way leading to the cochlea and the auditory nerve. And so we'll go into each one of these independently so that we can better understand how does sound that enters into our outer ear make it to our inner ear, and how our brain interprets those sounds into noise or into certain, I guess, identifiable items. So first, the outer ear. So again, some of the big anatomical parts include the pinna, is that visible outside of the side of your head. Appendage, I guess, is the best way to be able to describe it. The important thing about the pinna is that it's a wide variety of shapes and sizes to it. A way you can be able to think about it is it's kind of like a focusing dish, if you have like satellite TV. All of these different folds are actually designed, and your body specifically created all those folds in a way to better focus the energy of the sound waves into your ear canal. And so everyone, it's a little bit different. Some have more folds, some don't have as many folds, but ultimately all of these different characteristics are to be able to better direct that noise and those sounds into your ear canal. That's the next part, your auditory canal. It's just a tube that then will connect into your middle ear. The function of this, again, is to focus sound waves and carry them into the middle and inner ear. The biggest thing is that damage that could be caused, or damage that could be caused by malformations, whether that be a birth defect or maybe some sort of physical trauma that was experienced later. For example, some of the early pioneers of the church, one of the fastest items that developed frostbite and would have to be amputated off were actually their ears. There's very little blood circulation that occurs on the outside of the ear or into the outer ear. So that could also be able to impact their ability to be able to hear, because there's less items to be able to help focus the noise. But continuing on, and those pictures on the right of that last one just further are diagrams of the inner ear. But two of the largest, again, things you need to be aware of is the pinna, and then as well the auditory or the ear canal. Then continues on the middle ear. So anatomical parts that are important to be able to understand are the eardrum, otherwise known as the tympanic membrane, and the ossicles. So the ossicles are three tiny little bones. That is the most far right picture. They're very, very small. So that's a picture of someone's just fingertip, and they barely take up any of the space, maybe 1/5 of the space. These are very, very small bones. And those encompass as far as the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. So from that, they are further described as items that further transfer the noise into vibrations that the inner ear will then be able to translate. So this, both the second to the right picture and the picture right in the middle, just again describe the overall pathway that noise would take to be able to go through the middle ear. So as noise travels in through, into the pinna, through the ear canal, it reaches the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. That noise is then turned into a vibration and is amplified by the eardrum and is transferred through the malleus into the incus, and then the stapes is able to communicate with the inner ear, or is in contact with the inner ear, to then allow that energy to transfer into the inner ear. So again, the function of this is to be able to transfer those vibrations to the ossicles so that they can be amplified and converted and thus traveled into the inner ear for a better interpretation. Some damage that could be caused to these systems within the middle ear could be caused by ototoxins, physical trauma, or physical noise itself. So very loud noises could be able to cause these to stiffen up and not respond very well. Same thing, physical trauma. I think a very common thing that we hear is don't stick a Q-tip in your ear. If you stick it in too far, it could cause you to rupture your tympanic membrane. That's going to affect how well it's able to receive and convert those vibrations from the ear canal. And then ototoxins. This may be a new word for individuals. We've known about ototoxins since about the late 70s. But what ototoxins are, those are chemicals that actually can be able to induce hearing loss, whether or not someone is exposed to noise, which is a fascinating concept. Actually, as it's something that's sometimes a little bit hard to grasp. And we'll talk about it a little bit more. I will give you a heads up. There's nothing about ototoxins really in the test or the exams or anything like that, but it is a fascinating thing to be able to keep in mind, as there's a wide variety of chemicals that also impact your hearing. Then moving on is to the inner ear. So the inner ear is the most inner part of your ear. And the most important anatomical parts include the semicircular canals. Those are these little loops that are right here. Those actually can be able to help out with balance. And then as well, the cochlea, it's kind of looks like a snail shell. It kind of wraps up and it swirls upon itself. That's what the bottom right picture shows. And then as well, the auditory nerve. And so the auditory nerve, yes, and that top right picture right here, it further shows the tympanic membrane and how noise following these arrows goes through the tympanic membrane, gets converted into better, more interpretable vibrations. And then once it reaches the stapes, it then goes into the cochlea itself. And so once it travels through the cochlea, up here in the very top right, it's able to be interpreted and picked up by the auditory nerves. And so with that, the overall function, again, is that vibrations are carried from the middle ear to the inner ear and traveled into the cochlea itself. Lined within the cochlea are roughly about 16,000 hair cells. So these are literal hair follicles that are just detecting electrical impulses. And these can be able to better determine and I guess, well, a better way to be able to describe it, noise and vibrations travel into the cochlea. And depending upon what frequency those noises are, different hairs within the cochlea react. And those reactions from the hair cells causes electrical stimuli to then go through the auditory nerve and into the brain, where the brain can then interpret those vibrations and electrical impulses as sound. And so with that, that's ultimately the purpose of the inner ear, is to be able to take those vibrations, convert it into electrical impulses so that the auditory nerve can be able to deliver it to the brain so they can be interpreted. And so some very interesting things about those is you can think of those hair cells kind of like blades of grass. If you're ever walking, if you ever walk in your lawn, and if you ever do it like once or twice, if you step on a blade of grass, it bends it. But as long as you don't consistently step on that same blade of grass, that grass will stand back up just fine. That's very similar to these hair cells. So for example, if a certain frequency comes by and it causes these hair cells to react, they bend down and they send that electrical impulse, but then they rise back up. But if you are consistently being exposed to the same sounds again and again and again in a loud intensity, that causes those hair cells to go down and stay down. And if they're down too long, it could cause them to break. This is very important because as you go throughout the entire cochlea, different hairs pick up different frequencies. That's why as individuals, as they get exposed to a large amount of noise over a long period of time, those hair cells tend to die. Therefore, they have a harder time hearing. We spend a lot of time on this topic, but again, ultimately, damage could be caused by ototoxins itself. Blood that's being carried to these hair cells could cause the hair cells to be able to die or be impaired by certain chemicals that might come to it, and as well as physical noise itself by stimulating those hair cells too much and causing them to break. The inner ear is the biggest concern whenever it comes to occupational noise. That's the thing that we're trying to protect against the most, is damage to the inner ear, because a lot of that, whenever it comes to physical noise, is irreversible. So any sort of legal requirements that we talk about later, ultimately it's to protect against damage to the inner ear, which is very important to be able to understand. So again, ototoxic damage. We're not going to be going over this really in the class, but this is something that's, so I professionally, as an industrial hygienist, I deal with noise exposure all the time. And this is something that I do think is fascinating. And it's something that I do feel is important to be able to share, as it's something focused, at least in my field, that we're trying to get the word out and the emphasis out even more. So ultimately, the biggest thing that ototoxins affect are sensory neural damage, or that auditory nerve to the brain. And so with that, different examples of ototoxins that happen include different forms of solvents. So solvents, they're very good at like degreasing and cleaning up materials. You may interact with some or know of someone that might interact with some on their job. A lot of the target organs that happen, again, have to do with the cochlea, that snail shell structure that contains hair cells. One example is benzene. So another thing that this solvent, or solvents that contain benzene, can be able to attack is that stapes bone. So the stapedius muscle, it actually causes, or it impacts what's known as the middle ear reflex. So if you're exposed to very loud noises, the stapedius muscle actually kind of disconnects from the stapes from the rest of the inner ear bones, the ossicles. And that causes a lack in the vibrations being carried through to the inner ear. It's a way of protecting yourself from those loud noises. But overexposure to benzene has actually shown that it causes that muscle to relax too much, and therefore it's not able to contract and do its job. Therefore, you're being exposed to more noise. And so it has a kind of an additive effect whenever you combine that with loud noises. And with just fun fact, same thing, carbon monoxide, we commonly know that it's an asphyxiant. It attaches to hemoglobin, or the carbon monoxide itself attaches to hemoglobin, and therefore we're not getting oxygen throughout our systems. It affects the hair cells the very same way. The hair cells, they're not able to get oxygen sufficiently, and they tend to die or at least weaken. Therefore, they're not as receptive to those electrical impulses. Additionally, is this man right here on the left of the screen. If anyone would guess who it is Ludwig van Beethoven, or Beethoven. So with this, other metals have been identified to have ototoxic effects, such as cadmium, mercury, and lead. However, a lot of studies are inconclusive on how they actually impact the body. They just know that there's a higher incidence of hearing loss when individuals are working with these metals. But an example or one theory that individuals have, Ludwig van Beethoven, a masterful composer. However, he started losing his hearing very early on in his life. Well, one thing that was found within the autopsy of Beethoven is that his auditory nerves that connected to his cochlea to his brain were actually tremendously small, and they had shrunken over a long period of time. They weren't just like normal ones. And the other thing was that he had a very high increased lead content within his blood. One of the things is he was known to definitely drink a lot of wine during his time, and definitely being a very successful artist, he could be able to afford that passion of his. And so one of the things very common during that time, individuals' goblets that they had were lined with lead, which is very common material. So it's something that's speculated that the lead caused his auditory nerves to be able to shrink, and therefore he lost his hearing, potentially additionally lost his hearing due to an ototoxic effect to lead. Anyway, it's just an interesting thing. The other information is just talking about how the DoD, they also ran a study with a variety of different chemicals. I believe it was close to about 49 total chemicals. And they saw that there was a higher threshold shift, which means that people are losing their ability to hear when they were exposed to a chemical, then even though noise levels were below 85 decibels. And that 85 decibel range will become even more important later on. but it's just another fun piece of information on ototoxins and how chemicals can also impact. So hearing loss. There are four main types that we're really going to talk about and that are really important to be able to know. There's sensorineural, and so that involves damage to the nerve pathways from the inner ear to the brain. There's conductive, which means that it's any issue along either the outer, middle, or inner ear that makes it difficult for sound waves to transfer across the area. Example, again, trauma, developmental issues, or ototoxins. Then there's also tinnitus. This is one, I think it's one of the most common ones we hear. It's the ringing in the ears that people experience. And that's typically occurs because of consistent noise-induced trauma. And so as far as we hear it a lot, since I'm affiliated with the military, I hear it a lot just with individuals that are over the gun range. They definitely develop this, but a lot of other ones that work around jets or heavy machinery, just that consistent noise exposure can be able to cause tinnitus to occur where they're hearing these noises that don't actually exist. And then there's also presbycusis. And so this is also a sad thing, is that no matter what, no one can escape hearing loss, because presbycusis is just hearing loss due to aging. It happens just as life goes on. We lose our hearing over time. Two important definitions also to be able to understand is a standard threshold shift and a permanent threshold shift. So we talked about this a little bit on the last slide. What this is whenever our hearing is damaged, for example, if you go to a concert and you're exposed to you're right next to the speaker, and then at home, or you're driving home with your friends and you realize you're all yelling at each other, that's because you're experiencing a standard or a temporary threshold shift. That's where your ears better protect themselves. They're not being as responsive, or those hair cells, they're kind of bent over, so they have a harder time processing those electrical impulses. So you have to speak louder to be able to hear and to communicate. It's just a temporary shift, though. This happens to our ears all the time, but the time that it becomes a problem is if, for example, again, the concert analogy, if you go to a concert every day and you're being exposed like right there in front of the speaker every single day, that's whenever a permanent threshold shift could be able to occur. That's whenever certain frequencies you're unable to hear now because those hair cells, which were then previously just bent, now they've broken off, or they're just completely damaged and can no longer function properly. But that's something that's also just important to be able to know as we're moving forward. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about legal requirements in the occupational noise program. The biggest organization to be able to understand is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA. So OSHA is just a United States affiliated program. So those of you who are outside of the United States, I apologize, but this is something that's important for the class to be able to understand. And as far as OSHA, they establish legal guidelines for all companies within the United States, or based within the United States as well. Specifically, whenever it comes to noise, they establish guidelines that companies have to follow to monitor hazardous noise exposures within the workplace. And all of these are typically, every regulation is typically based upon a traditional 8-hour day. And so that's an important figure to be able to understand whenever moving forward. So whenever we're talking about noise in this graph here on the right, if you can be able to see it, all it does is it illustrates that OSHA has defined that you could be exposed to a certain level of noise, typically expressed again in intensity or energy, such as dBA, or dB standing for decibels. You can be able to withstand a certain level of decibels for a certain period of time. So from this, duration per day is in the left column, and that's in hours. The right column, sound level in dBA, or decibels, that are A-weighted. We're not going to go into A-weighted, C-weighted, Z-weighted. Just know that dBA is a decibel weighting. That's it, as a unit. That's important whenever it comes to noise exposure. So from that, is OSHA has outlined that you can be exposed for 8 hours a day at 90 decibels. But then you can be exposed to 92 decibels for 6 hours a day. You can be exposed for 95 decibels for 4 hours a day. And then for 3 hours a day, you can be exposed for 97. In 2 hours, that's 100 decibels. 1.5 hours, that's 102 decibels. 1 hour, 105 decibels. Half an hour, 110 decibels. Less than a quarter of an hour, so 15 minutes, 115 decibels. So some of this may not make sense, but I have an example. So I deal with this stuff all the time. So for example, just 2 weeks ago, I actually did a sound level measurement survey for one of the shops that I'm over. They called because they were concerned about some noise exposure that they had, and we hadn't previously looked at their shop, so I was very interested in looking at it. One of their processes, they load test equipment. And so what does load test mean? That means that they hook it up to some computers to be able to make sure that it's going to operate correctly whenever it's in a real world environment. So what they have to do is they have to start a generator that mimics a jet engine. It's a jet engine turbine generator, and it is able to produce a certain type of electrical charge at a high enough frequency or intensity that mimics what it would be like if it was an actual jet sitting there. And they hook that up to, for example, this equipment, so that then they can make sure that the equipment will operate properly if it's hooked up to an actual jet. So I took a sound level meter and I went out and I saw that whenever the generator was going off, it was producing a noise sound level that was 120 dBA. So an example of that is that then I took that to OSHA's chart right there to be able to figure out how long can they sit here next to this generator without being overexposed to noise. And again, if you're overexposed to noise, that's when hearing loss and hearing damage can be able to occur. If it's damage caused on the workplace, that's very bad. So at 120 dBA, I illustrated it down below on the right. At 120 dBA, you can be able to be exposed for 0.125 hours, otherwise known as 7.5 minutes. Well, the downside is that they are performing this process for 10 hours a day. They have someone stationed right next to that generator for 10 hours. So this individual who gets stationed right there is being way overexposed for noise. And luckily, they throw in some sort of controls, and these are controls that we're going to be going over later, like hearing protection, earmuffs and earplugs. But it was definitely a major concern because that is very damaging to his ear. But just as an example, it's important just to be able to understand that with each time of how long or with every intensity in a decibel range that employees are exposed to, they have a certain time limit that OSHA says they can be around. You don't have to memorize this table. This is just here for you to have kind of a grasp and understanding that with each sound level measurement, there is a time that individuals are allowed to be near that per OSHA. So legal exposure limits. So the most important one is this very first one, so OSHA's. The other two are just good frame of references, but the one that you definitely need to know, no matter what, is the first one. So the first one, again, is OSHA's, otherwise known as a permissible exposure limit. So what this is OSHA saying that if you were exposed for an 8-hour period of time, an average of 90 decibels, then you're at 100% of your noise limit for the entire day. So if you're at 91, you're being overexposed. If you're at 89, you're not being exposed, or you could be exposed a little bit more. But it's important to be able to understand this is the legal limit that OSHA has established before hearing loss and hearing damage could occur. It's 90 dBA. And so there's also what's known as an exchange rate. So what that means is, and it'll make a little bit more sense, I believe on the next slide, I go into a little bit more, but this is a certain rate at being able to understand in relation to that chart that we went over last time. We'll talk about it the next slide. So two other organizations that are also important, but you don't have to know for this. It's just as a matter of fact, is the National Institute of Occupational Hygiene, otherwise known, or actually National Institute of Safety and Health. I actually wrote that down wrong. I don't know why. But anyway, otherwise known as NIOSH. They're related to the CDC. They come out with something known as the Recommended Exposure Limit, or REL. So they actually suggest that for an 8-hour period of time, you should actually only be exposed to 85 dBA. And they believe an exchange rate of 3 is more appropriate. Same thing, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, so such as myself, they issue what's known as a threshold limit value, or TLV. And this one may sound familiar to a lot of those individuals outside the United States. There's a lot of countries that they follow the TLVs rather than OSHA. Just OSHA is very specific to the United States, but the TLV, the ACGIH, American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, and the TLVs they set are very widely accepted by other countries. They also suggest an 85 dBA as their exposure limit for the day when you'll reach 100%, and an exchange rate of 3 dB. So now let's go into a little bit more. What in the world are exchange limits? What are they? Why are they important? So this graph here on the right, it's just illustrating the same thing we saw in that table a little while ago. The y-axis is the permissible noise exposure in hours per day. So for example, 0 hours all the way up to 8 hours, the traditional workday. And then the x-axis down here is the sound level in decibels. So it goes from 85 to 105. And it just shows you again that for 8 hours, you can be exposed to, this is actually according to ACGIH, or this is the TLV. This is even the OSHA one, I apologize. But it just illustrates at least the exponential curve that a lot of these are prone to. As noise intensity increases, what it is the allowable time that you can be exposed to it decreases exponentially. So a great example of that is it all has to depend with the exchange rate. So again, for example, right up here, the OSHA PEL, or the permissible exposure limit, is 90 dBA, and it has a 5 dB exchange rate. So what is that? What that's saying is that at 90 decibels, you can be exposed for 8 hours. But at 95 decibels, so 5 more than 90, you can be at 4 hours for the day. So every time that you do one exchange rate, the allowable time halves. So again, 90 decibels for 8 hours, 95, 4 hours, 100, 2 hours, 105, 1 hour. That's the stance that OSHA takes to be able to protect their workers, and how they feel that relationship between hours you're allowed to be exposed and the sound level intensity occurs. So definitely take some time. If you are confused, be sure to reach out. This is an important thing just to be able to understand a little bit, is that how that exponential curve that noise interacts with is important. I'll give you a hint. On the quiz and on the exam, there is one question that deals with this. But as long as you remember, every 5 decibels, the time allowed at that level halves, you should be fine. But definitely reach out if you have any questions, and we can go over something specific a little bit more. Okay, legal requirements, workplace monitoring programs. So OSHA in 29 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 1910.95 outlines their hazardous noise program and what they're holding employers responsible for. So they illustrate 2 different levels. So there's an 8-hour average of 85 decibels, otherwise known as the action level, and also an 85 or an 8-hour limit, 8-hour average at 90 decibels, otherwise known as, again, the PEL, or the permissible exposure limit. And so again, if you keep in mind with the exchange rate, what they're doing is OSHA has 2 levels where there's the 90 decibel Pel. And then they're saying if you double the amount of time, that's 85. If you go one exchange rate below, that's the action level. The action level just means they're warning employers that, hey, you need to start looking at hazardous noise now. So at that 85 decibel range, OSHA requires that employers implement a hearing conservation program, an exposure monitoring plan to be able to gather noise dosimetry data and noise data for hazardous equipment, and also perform audiometric testing. So as far as going into the to an audiologist and having an audiogram, you sit in a really quiet booth with some headphones on, and you press a button when you hear a beep. But at that 85 decibel range, employers are required to implement these three things: hearing conservation program, exposure monitoring plan, and audiometric testing. And so, if at that 8-hour average of 90 decibels, employers need to start implementing controls to be able to control the hazardous noise that are within the workplaces so that they can better protect their employees. In addition to that, they emphasize that impulse noises should never be above 140 dB. So a great example of this is if you were within 10 feet of a firework exploding, and we're talking about those big mortar fireworks, that can average and peak close to 140 decibels. Or even most jets within the Air Force that I work with, they as well, just in idle, sometimes go up to 140 dB. We actually have a study that we did where they just ramped up the engine as far as it can go. It's known as a functional check. And they idled the engine and they ramped it up, and our sound level meters went up to 140 and then they leveled out. And that's not because the noise leveled out. That's because our meters couldn't go beyond 140. So we don't know how loud they were actually going. But at that point, you're looking at exposure of maybe quarter of a second, and that's it. So there's a reason that they emphasize 140. Nothing should ever be above that. But continuing on, I love tangents if you can't guess. But at the very bottom, a hearing conservation program must outline one specific thing, which is otherwise known as the hierarchy of controls. Those of you that are safety focused, as far as your major, you already know this. Beat it black and blue, hierarchy of controls, what it is. But what the hierarchy of controls are, for anyone who doesn't know, it is the order by which you should be implementing control measures to be able to adequately protect individuals. So OSHA illustrates that a hearing conservation program must contain three elements or three methods to better control noise exposure for employees. Those being engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment such as PPE. Some good examples of engineering controls include setting up barriers or walls, blockades, or even putting sound dampening material on walls to be able to try to reduce the sound levels that are within the area. Administrative controls that a company could be able to implement are time limits. For example, again, everyone at certain levels can be exposed to noise for a certain amount of time. If they're being exposed for at 95 decibels, they may say that worker A can work in this area for 4 hours, but then worker B has to replace worker A after that 4 hours to work the rest of the shift. That way they hopefully stay below that 90 decibel average for the entire workday. And then there's personal protective equipment. These things could be able to encompass as far as earplugs, earmuffs, or even canal caps. But these are things that can be able to help control the amount of noise and vibration entering into the outer ear itself. So then finally is assessing and measuring hazardous noise. So there are three pieces of equipment that are very important to be able to understand whenever it comes to noise measurements. That's sound level meters, noise dosimeters, and octave band analyzers. So up at the very top in the top right, that is a sound level meter. So this measures the sound pressure level at a certain point in time. For example, this 1 second, this is what the sound pressure level is. This is a great initial screening tool if you don't know what a noise exposure is. Again, for example, that generator, I didn't go out with a noise dosimeter or an octave band analyzer at this time. I went out with a sound level meter because I had never seen this piece of equipment before. I just needed something that would quickly tell me, is this hazardous or is it not? And what number could it associate? So again, good initial screening tool. Then if it does show, for example, if you take a sound level meter out and it's at 95 decibels, all right, that means that there could be a noise issue within this workplace or with this piece of equipment. So then you may go back out with a noise dosimeter. So a noise dosimeter, or performing noise dosimetry, that's the picture in the bottom right, the one with the microphone, the little black tip, windscreen at the very top. This is able to measure employee sound level exposure over a period of time, typically 8 hours, an entire work shift. And so this one is very important just because since it measures employee exposure, this can be able to provide legal documentation on whether you are or are not compliant with OSHA regulations. So this takes numerous sound level measurements to create what's known as a time-weighted average, or TWA, for the entire workday. So a dosimeter is kind of like a sound level meter, but it takes a great multitude of measurements throughout the entire day to put it into one single number known as a TWA, or that's your 8-hour average for the workday. So again, this is useful for legal determination of what an individual's exposure is for an 8-hour workday. So then we have octave band analyzers. I don't have a picture of that because most often nowadays, octave band analyzers are actually put into the same device as a sound level meter. So they may look like the one on the top right, theoretically. I don't think that one would actually have octave band capabilities just by the look of it, but a lot of sound level meters have the ability to be an octave band nowadays as well. So what this is that, again, noise has to do with the pressure or the intensity of the energy, and then as well the frequency that it's at. And that's, again, how fast that it rotates in a cycle. An octave band analyzer is able to take a noise and then it splits it up across that entire range of frequencies from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And it's able to determine where is this noise source at in regards to what frequency is it being churned at. It's important to be able to understand that every single noise that we are exposed to isn't just at one frequency, it's at the entire frequency range. It's everywhere. It's all over the place, all over the board on this graph, if you will, and being able to better understand. But there are certain peaks where maybe that, or I guess a good example again is that generator. I did an octave band analysis on it to be able to see at what frequency is this sound level more likely to be at. And I noticed that the octave band it wasn't near that 20 hertz range, but it was closer to the 20 kilohertz range. That can be able to help us in determining how to best implement or design controls to be able to eliminate or reduce that noise exposure. For example, an engineering control what you could do is that generator was outside of a building. We potentially could construct a structure around that generator that's made of a certain sound dampening material that is good for dampening sounds at that specific frequency. Same thing, different hearing protection is actually good at certain frequencies and not others. So that's where an octave band analyzer can be able to help. But again, typically the order and the flow that you handle measuring and assessing hazardous noise is you first take an initial sound level reading, then you collect noise dosimetry, and then afterwards, when you're designing controls, you do perform octave band analysis. And it's always important, just that very last point is all of your equipment, you should always calibrate it regularly. That way you know that it's actually real, that the sound level measurements are true so that you're getting accurate readings. But ultimately, that's really it. That's all I really wanted to be able to go over during this time. It looks like it's just a black screen right now instead of showing me. So One second. Okay, no, fantastic. So that's really it for the week. I tried to be able to outline it. I apologize for the little scatterbrained. But just like it was last week, if you focus on some of the key terms we looked at in this weekly review, and in addition to reading the readings, you should be fine and be prepared for all the upcoming assignments. As an additional plug, make sure to review the information. I opened up all of the exam or all of the quizzes so that you can be able to review the answers and look at the correct answers in preparation for the upcoming test as a study guide for the exam. So definitely good luck with the exam. I plan on as well issuing another video once the week 4 quiz ends, going over the material a little bit, but good luck, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.